Hi, I'm Cari Kelemen. Today I have with me John Guandolo. How are you today, John?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me on your little.
I'm thrilled to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, John.
I'm a Naval Academy graduate. I served as an infantry and reconnaissance officer in the Marine Corps, combat veteran, and in 1996 joined the FBI as a special agent.
Okay.
Spent about 12 and a half, 13 years in the FBI. While in the FBI, I served after 9/11 in the Counterterrorism Division and put together the first training inside the government on the Muslim Brotherhood, Sharia, and the global Islamic movement in 2006. Was recruited out of the FBI in 2008 to work for the Department of Defense, doing strategic analysis of the Islamic threat. And under the previous administration, that work was completely defunded. So in 2012, I started understanding the threat to continue to educate. And so what we do is train, educate, consult with state, local officials. Primarily, I have briefed a large number of members of Congress and intelligence directorate leaders and all kinds of folks. But our work's primarily at the state and local level because we think that's where we're going to win or lose this war.
Excellent. Boy, you are doing the Lord's work, let me tell you on that. That's just amazing. So you also have so your new organization is called Understanding the Threat.
Yes.
Okay. And then you also have a blog spot?
Sure.
Website.
Yep, understandingthethreat.com. And then on there is attached our blog, and we do 2 articles a week, one on Monday, that's a targeted article, and the Thursday, we call it Throwback Thursday, usually but not always linked to the Monday topic, looking back to remind people of some key events that have happened. But our primary focus, we're a national security consulting organization, but we primarily focus on the Islamic threat, but we deal with other threats as well.
Okay. All right. So give me an overhead view. What is the number one concern an American citizen like me should have regarding Islam?
Well, I think the problem is, number one, there seems to be a real gross ignorance about what Islam is and what Islam teaches. Mm-hmm. So what we do, I get accused and our organization gets accused of misrepresenting Islam, being Islamophobic or whatever. But the reality is that we teach what is being taught in Islamic schools and mosques all across the United States. We use the materials they teach, and we use the materials that are taught at the most prestigious schools of Islamic jurisprudence, Al-Azhar in Cairo, Egypt, for instance. Mm-hmm. So what is interesting is what's being taught in elementary and junior high school Islamic schools in the United States and what is taught at the highest school of Islamic jurisprudence, Al-Azhar in Cairo, is in fact exactly what ISIS and Al-Qaeda say are the requirements of Islam. And that is to establish a caliphate under Sharia law, and the vehicle to do that is jihad, which is only defined in Islamic law, in 100% of Islamic law, as warfare to establish the religion.
Okay, so what is the biggest misunderstanding, do you think, that most people have about it?
Well, they don't know that. They think that what Islam is what their friend who's a Muslim tells them, or more practically, what the leaders of Muslim Brotherhood groups in the United States who wear suits and get in front of television cameras and are exclusively the advisors to our U.S. government and in many cases state and local governments, what they are saying, which is that Islam's a religion of peace, and it doesn't teach what ISIS and Al-Qaeda are doing or perversions of Islam. And the problem is there's no factual basis to those comments. And yet 100% of all Islamic doctrine supports what ISIS and Al-Qaeda say. As a matter of fact, UTT has a standing offer that if you can demonstrate something we teach about Islam and what Sharia says specifically, and the formation of Sharia, who the Muslim Brotherhood is, what their objectives are, and the network here in the United States, if you can demonstrate that something we're putting out is untrue, we'll stop teaching it. We'll give that person who shows that to us $1,000.
There you go.
Now, Now, we have presented this where there have been many Muslims in the room, where there have been Muslim brothers in the room. I've actually sent emails to Muslim Brotherhood leaders to let them know this is our challenge. And no takers yet in 2.5 years.
Interesting. Very,
not one.
Very interesting.
0. Yeah.
Well, that's very smart. Reminds me of Andrew Breitbart offering a scholarship to the United Negro College Fund, I believe, if anyone could show footage of people spitting on John Lewis as he was walking from the courthouse steps during the passage of Obamacare. And, people were spitting on us. And he goes, well, I'll give you money if you can show me footage. And he didn't have any takers on that either. So that's an excellent strategy, John. I love that. Okay.
No takers yet.
No takers yet. Okay, so I have this question. Most of our audience that's probably listening to this are very active on social media. How is the Muslim Brotherhood using social media to advance their goals?
All right, that's a good question. So first, just a couple quick hits on that, and then I'll tell a story that I have about how they organize. Number one, they do organize a lot. They use Twitter. The leaders, certainly some of them use Twitter. It's actually, fortunately for us, how we've identified certain people and their true intentions, because they're dumb enough to put pictures of them, next to the Muslim Brotherhood's symbol or themselves in Egypt. We've caught some of them posting stuff on Facebook and Twitter and other things. So it's good. It's good when the bad guys aren't that bright. The story I want to share is that in several weeks ago, within the last 2 months, I would say about 6 weeks ago, I was in Kansas doing a speech for a group of citizens. And as usual, the Muslim Brotherhood found out about it. And so they put out on Twitter and Facebook where I was going to be. It was at a theater, and about 50 left-wing socialists show up. Now, the interesting thing is I got the name of the woman and the husband and wife that put this out, and they were from a local Muslim Brotherhood organization.
Interesting.
And I put that out, and I put their home address out on my tweet. Let me just tell you, they complained, and Twitter froze my account for a few hours until I finally begrudgingly deleted the tweet. But if they're going to threaten, and because they're threatening me, they were threatening, they've threatened me. We have several open investigations around the country by local and state law enforcement, and one with the FBI for people that have made threats. So this is the nature of the war we're in. It's I'm a Marine. It's okay, but we're at war. So anyway, back to that. I had a hard time, kind of containing myself with all these people outside protesting, and some of the signs were comical. Anyway, so I snuck out the back door and came around, walked down the street, and just plowed right into the middle of the crowd and just started asking them, like, hey, what's going on? And they were like, oh, there's this guy, and he's in there, and he's hateful, and he's saying all this stuff that's untrue about Islam and Muslims. I'm like, oh, have you ever heard him talk? And they were like, no. I'm like, have you ever read stuff he's written or seen him, any of his speeches? And they were like, no. I'm like, well, how do you know what he says? And they looked at there was these three ladies, and they all looked at each other. They're like, well, we just know, he's a bad guy, and he's racist. And all. It was comical. And right at that point, I started asking them some questions, which they couldn't answer, like, have you ever read Sharia law? And they're like, no. And I said, well, have you read anything about the Holy Land Foundation trial, about the Muslim Brotherhood network here in the United States? They were like, no. I'm like, so you've never heard this guy speak, and you've never done any research on the topics that he talks about. So how do you know he's wrong? And right then, this lady popped her head over, and she goes, hey, are you John Guandolo? Like, yes, I am. She was the organizer of the rally. So it was pretty entertaining. And then, of course, they all started screaming. And I said, well, why can't we have a discussion? They're like, ah. And this one lady, she goes, I mean, they were just, it was comical, but completely ignorant. And that's,
Okay, you failed to ask him one question, John. How much are you getting paid to be here?
I just made the assumption they're getting paid to be there. That's that everywhere I go where the protesters show up when I speak, They're paid. I mean, because that's part of what I teach law enforcement is how the hard left Marxist Communist Party USA are working directly with the Muslim Brotherhood at the local level, state level, national level, and at the international level. We walk it out for the police.
Yeah.
And it's getting pretty dangerous.
It is getting dangerous. What do you think of the hot spots within the United States? Where is it the most dangerous, do you think?
That's a tough question because there are a lot of dangerous areas. But the ones I would highlight, maybe the 4 or 5, Detroit and Dearborn, Michigan, Minneapolis. We actually did, if people go on our website, understandthreat.com, I wrote an article that's one of the 3 most popular, most read. It's called The Twin Cities Are Lost. And it's literally, from my point, from a military analysis perspective, looking at Minneapolis, St. Paul. But they're lost.
Okay, so define lost. What do you mean by that?
Meaning from a military perspective, we consider that, Understand the Threat considers that enemy territory. And we detail it. For people who are not following this, that may sound like, over the top. But when you understand the control by jihadis inside Minneapolis and St. Paul is significant. And the governor, the lieutenant governor, the mayor of Minneapolis, up until recently, the U.S. attorney there, the sheriff of Hennepin County, and most of the Christian and Jewish leaders were completely surrendered and batting for the other team. No. So it's pretty bad there. Now, we were just there last week and met with some significant community leaders that are not. They're trying to figure out how to fight back and retake their state. But the outskirts, outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, many, many patriots and people in law enforcement that get it.
Yep.
But pretty much Minnesota is run from Minneapolis, St. Paul. But there are other hot spots that you wouldn't think. Nashville is in very bad shape.
You're kidding.
Oh, no. Horrible. Tampa, Florida. Really bad. So there are places all over the United States. Dallas, Texas has got a significant jihadi organized movement here. But I think Dallas may be able to turn it around because of both citizens and law enforcement. And there's a different attitude in Texas that doesn't exist in some other states.
Don't mess with Texas.
That's what I heard. What I've heard, yeah.
Okay, so you've got these hot spots in these urban areas, right? And these urban areas are surrounded by what you think are people who understand, people who are pro-America, people who would help the situation. Can they squeeze in? Can they squeeze in on these urban areas? I mean, is there a way to kind of? Is it a good thing that they're all together in these spots? Is there a silver lining there that they're kind of all together?
In some places, maybe, but it's not that way in every state. So different states have a different situation. Some states, they've got jihadi organizations sprinkled across the state, and there is no core center place. You know, what we do when our kind of keystone program is our 3-day law enforcement program. And we're the only ones in the country that are doing what we're doing, which is giving law enforcement the tools to proactively find terrorists, to map out the network, and then to develop investigative strategies, both at the local level, the county level, and the city level, and working with attorney generals to, at the state level, dismantle these networks. Right. And because we're the only ones doing that, man, do we take some incoming rounds from the media, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and from these Islamic groups. But that's fine, because what we're seeing is on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and in response to these articles that the media are putting out on a regular basis about me and about our organization, is the majority of the comments are hitting back at the media and hitting back at this narrative that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism and all this. People are I believe that's a big reason why the last presidential election went the way it did. I think Americans realize it. The problem is They don't understand how bad it is.
Yeah.
And the network is significant here. Let me just see if in 1 minute I can kind of give just a blurb for people that are going to watch this or are watching this and don't understand this threat. So first of all, the Holy Land Foundation trial, adjudicated in Dallas in 2008, a 15-year FBI investigation culminating in the indictment and conviction of the largest Islamic charity in America, which turned out to be a terrorist organization. Yes. So a Hamas organization was convicted. All its leaders were convicted, 2008. But the 15-year FBI investigation and all the evidence collected, all the testimony, all of it revealed there is a massive Islamic movement in the United States that is led by the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood, that their stated objective is to wage, quote, civilization jihad, to overthrow the U.S. government. And this movement includes all of the prominent Islamic groups in the United States, the most prominent groups. So if you just start right there, we know that of the over 3,000 Islamic centers, mosques in the United States, most of them are controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
So their influence is significant. There is a massive movement. So necessarily, this has to be dealt with, not at the national security federal level, although it needs to be.
Right.
We're going to win or lose this thing at the local level, counties. So sheriffs and pastors become the most important people that have got to understand this and have got to deal with this at their local level and make it so that these organizations can't exist in these communities because they're a danger, they're a threat.
Yes.
And all the attacks we're seeing inside the United States, and this goes for Europe too, these people are being indoctrinated at Muslim Brotherhood mosques and Islamic societies, inside, meaning the Islamic Society of Boston, for instance, which, you know, the Boston Marathon bomber came out of, the Islamic Society of Greater Chattanooga that produced the shooter that killed our service members in Chattanooga. So these places are not only there teaching this stuff, people are acting on it and killing Americans. And we need to shut them down. We need to start locking these people up.
Okay, well, you brought up two things I want to follow up on. When we were going back to Minneapolis, St. Paul, you said the pastors, some of the Christians and Jewish synagogue leaders have kind of given up, joined forces. And then you also talk about pastors being one of the first lines of defense against the spread of Islam. Can you explore that a little bit with me? Tell me what role a pastor can take and what road are they taking or not taking that needs to happen?
Well, I mean, if 10% of pastors after 9/11 had simply just spoken truth about Islam, America wouldn't have been just barraged during the Bush administration and, quite frankly, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, that Islam's a religion of peace. And quite frankly, right now we have a national security advisor who says the same thing. ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. That's just not true.
That's not true.
And so that's the first part. And so we have pastors that, for whatever reason, be it out of ignorance or fear or cowardice, they're simply not speaking truth about Islam. What in the pastors and the rabbis that I've spoken with who think Islam, you know, they have to help Islam, is because they're looking at it incorrectly. They're looking at it as a freedom of, religious liberty issue.
Right.
Except, as I frequently mention, I want to show this, if I may. This happens to be a book, What Islam's All About. It is the most widely used textbook in Islamic schools in the United States. And it says in the very first chapter, the very beginning, I'm just going to read it. Matter of fact, first I'm going to show it because I want your readers to see the little highlighted area there. And this is what, since you're recording this, here's what it says. Islam is not a religion, however, but a complete way of life. So they're teaching children, and it goes on in here to say that it is it's a complete way of life, social, cultural, military, political, and religious, all governed by Sharia law. In this book, it says the basis for the legal and political system is the Sharia of Allah. And the law of the land, these are quotes, the law of the land is a Sharia of Allah. And the last quote, the duty of the Muslim citizen is to be loyal to the Islamic State. Mm-hmm. Now, this is being taught in the United States. Now, why would they teach just? It also teaches that if you die in jihad, you're a shaheed, and you go to paradise. It's the only way to guarantee you go to paradise. Mm-hmm. So now the question would be, why would the most widely used textbook in junior high schools and Islamic schools in the United States teach this? And the answer is because that's what Islam is.
That's what Islam is. But here's a contradiction I'm hearing, John. We've got, and I remember Bush saying this right after 9/11, Islam is a religion of peace. We're learning it's not as only is it not a religion of peace, it's not even a religion. So if you have something that's not a religion, it's a governing philosophy or what organization, complete way of life, and yet it's being protected culturally from people who say it's a freedom of speech issue, a religious freedom issue. If it's not a religion, how can it be protected under religious freedom? That's the contradiction I'm hearing.
Right. Well, I should have told you at the beginning, you shouldn't ask logical questions. You're asking logical questions. That's exactly the question. And the answer is the reason they're getting away with it, I think, is twofold. Number one, we do not understand this threat. We do not understand Islam. That's why the name of my organization is Understanding the Threat.
Yeah.
Two, I believe, in my experience traveling around the country, I've spoken to and briefed over 100 members of Congress and directors of intelligence agencies. Mm-hmm. I never briefed a 3 or 4-star general or a chairman of a major committee in the U.S. Congress that understood this. And that is the problem. And
that is the problem.
But the other piece of this problem is we don't know who we are. As I've gone around, there's a friend of mine who's quite a character, and when we would go up and brief members of Congress, he would ask them, hey, sir, where do our rights come from? Or, hey, ma'am, where do our rights come from? Members of Congress.
Yeah.
And they would say such idiotic things like the Constitution, federal law. Very few would say God.
Right.
Which is articulated in the ideal of this country, which is in the Declaration. That's the ideal for who we are. And so we have leaders. I can tell you, we do on the third day of our 3-day program for law enforcement, the first hour and a half of day 3 is a session on our founding principles as it specifically relates to U.S. law and government. And that, as it turns out, is the most impactful session, because for the first 2 days, we get a lot of the law enforcement officers coming up and saying how embarrassed they are that they've never heard this. How come we don't know this? The threat is so much worse than we had any idea. But then the next morning they come up and say, thank you. I realize I didn't know what my oath actually meant, and now I do.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of the oldest adages. If you understand your enemy and you understand yourself, you'll never be defeated in battle. And I believe that's true. And I think one of the problems in this country is we don't know who we are anymore. Some people do. But my experience is the vast majority of people do not. We're not teaching it in our schools. Parents aren't teaching this to their children. Churches certainly are not teaching who we are as a nation, many of them. So it's no wonder why pastors then don't have the backbone to defend this nation, because if you don't really understand Islam, that's gray, and your understanding of this country is kind of gray, then the two, you can't really see how they're not, maybe they're close. I hear a lot of pastors say 1 God, 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I mean, the State Department liaison under President Bush said that.
Oh, gee.
We're, 1 God, 3 Abrahamic faiths. We had a policy under Bush. This is what we're up against. And so I think when you actually know who we are as a country, and you understand what the threat actually is, it's black and white. There's a difference. And the two don't have anything in common. Right. Sharia has nothing in common with our founding principles and with the federal code and the Constitution.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. Okay, so when you say we are teaching, how many people are we talking about? How big is understanding the threat?
It's pretty small. It's just a handful of us.
A handful
just a few
of you.
of us.
But you're educating law enforcement on a local level, and you're
We are.
also educating churches that want to be.
We are. We have a church program. We actually have, just in the last 3 months, waived our fees for churches because we're actually working with some pastors and with law enforcement in some cases that have been open here in the United States based on Muslims who are doing physical surveillances of churches, pre-attack surveillances. So we're trying to get churches to, number one, understand the threat, number two, consider, some security measures. And, I was a SWAT team leader for the Washington Field Office FBI SWAT team. And I come from a fairly significant tactical background in the Marine Corps, coming from Force Recon. So we talk about that, and we actually work with a few organizations of guys that are colleagues of mine that full-time teach churches. They'll come in and assess churches, and they'll talk about setting up security.
That's great.
Churches, just last July in France, you had a Catholic priest beheaded during Catholic Mass.
Oh, no.
And that's coming here. These guys are already here, and they're already scoping out churches, and we know that as a matter of fact. So we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
And again, we're the only ones doing this kind of work. So yes, we would love to come in. Right now, our agreement is if our expenses are covered and the church just takes a love offering while we're there, we will do from several hour program up to an 8-hour program for the churches.
Excellent. So if somebody says, I want you guys talking to my local police, or I want you guys talking to my church leaders, my pastor, how do we get a hold of you? How can we help?
Well, several things. One, you can contact us through the website.
Okay.
That's easy. And the contact information is there. You can just say, we receive stuff every day. Okay. Actually, today I have 3 requests for churches. Good. And one request for a public speaking with a particular group. So those things come in all the time. But we do encourage you. We encourage people to go to our website, Understand the Threat, sign up for the newsletter so you'll get the articles. We don't overload you, just the 2 articles a week. Follow us on Twitter. UTT_USA is our Twitter handle. Like us on Facebook, Understand the Threat. We have a YouTube channel, Understanding the Threat, with almost, I think we're up to 70 videos. And again, they're short, and we have made just 2 or 3 that are long intentionally, but most of them are, 3 minutes or less. Many of them are, right around 1.5 minutes.
Great.
But they're informative, and they're meant to be tight and informative. And we now have a radio program, and I encourage your listeners to go to worldviewradio.com.
Great.
We just did our second episode, which is 30 minutes once a week. They post on Mondays, and we put out an announcement. 30 minutes, very tight, very informative, and also a little entertaining in there, because when you're fighting the counter jihad, you got to keep a sense of humor.
Yes, you do. Yes,
keep your sanity.
Okay, so we'll end on a sense of humor. At the very beginning of the interview, you said when these people were protesting you at this theater, they had some pretty comical signs. Do you remember what any of them said?
Well, there are some that I see. First of all, some of them were pre-printed.
Oh, yeah.
That, which is always the sign that, those things don't happen for free.
Yeah.
So there's somebody behind it, but some of them had nothing to do with it. But some of them were hate is not a virtue. Let's see, Islam isn't the enemy. Muslims are our friends. Things like this.
Oh, man.
It just, I can't remember some of the most comical ones because those aren't really that comical. But I'll try to dig through my pictures. We had some photos that night, and some of the guys captured them. And there was a news reporter there. She did a story, and it wasn't much of a story because she had no idea what we were teaching. I mean, again, I just did an interview. We're going to be in Mesa, Arizona next week for a 3-day program with the police there. We have over 100 law enforcement officers being taught at the Mesa Police Department.
Great.
And every day for the last 2 weeks, the media has put out both television and print and online reports about what a hater I am and how horrible our program is. The SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU, Hamas doing business as CARE, constantly protesting and calling for this thing to be shut down. And thank God that there is some backbone in Arizona and Phoenix with the county prosecutor, with the law enforcement leadership, the Mesa police chief, just absolute rock solid. They just say, hey, hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement in Arizona have had this program, and it's factual. And oh, by the way, we've opened cases based on this information. So no, we're not shutting it down. Thank you.
Excellent.
We believe this protects our community. So
excellent.
Awesome.
I think you could find a volunteer too, John, to go amongst the crowd in Arizona passing out flyers about that $1,000 reward. Come on in, listen to what he has to say, and if he says anything wrong, it's yours. And just print it on a piece of paper. It looks like $1,000 bill.
That's a good idea.
And just have them come on in and give it to the media too. Make them cover you.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I challenged the guy. I did an interview with the local NBC last night, and I told him about the challenge. I'm like, tell me what we're saying that's wrong. And his response was, you need to tell us what's right about what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
And I just said,
why don't you do your job as a reporter and come find out?
That's exactly what I told him. I said, how about a little investigative journalism? I said, we produce DVDs and books. We have articles, hundreds of articles. Go to YouTube. We have 70 videos. Show us where what we're talking about is incorrect. You lazy journalist.
Yes, they're so lazy. You're absolutely right. They're lazy. Well, maybe somebody will take you up on it and come in and learn something. But I'm so thrilled that you're talking to law enforcement. John, I'm so grateful you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
This is it is a war, and you're a general in it, and you're leading a charge, and gosh, I so appreciate it. And I know patriotic Americans are cheering, watching this right now, going, way to go, John Guandolo. Way to go, understanding the threat. You guys are doing great work. And in any way our listeners can help you out, I will put the links in the description below the YouTube. And God bless you.
Thank you. I would just add this with that is we have partnered with a group, and we have an Americans for America campaign. And you can go on the website. It's on the homepage.
Okay.
And people can give a tax-deductible donation. We love big donations, but we just challenge you, just $5.
Yeah.
Just give $5. And if that's all you can give, if you give more, great, because that goes to support law enforcement programs for departments that can't afford it.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to continually help support local law enforcement that want the programs but can't afford it.
Yeah.
They're not a big programs like Phoenix and the state law enforcement agencies that support us in these smaller sheriff's offices. So that's just one other way. But thank you so much for kind of passing this information out and sharing it with folks.
Happy to do it, because knowledge is power, and we need to know, like you said, we need to know ourselves and we need to know our enemy. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.